No issues where I don't understand both sides. Taxation, the size of government, abortion, socialism, capitalism. As strongly as I feel about any issue, I understand the opposition. But there is an exception, the death penalty for...
Yes, Dennis Prager, the guy who believes that without God, morality is based solely on opinions, has a very strong opinion on the death penalty. He starts this video by saying that no matter what the issue, he always tries to see both sides of the argument, and he can usually understand the opposite side, except in the case of the death penalty. We're already starting off on a bad foot here because Prager states point blank that he does not understand the other side and solely wishes to convince us that his side is correct, using arguments that are solely based on emotions. I would also like to state that he immediately brands every issue as if it only has two sides, which turns off many people from talking about issues as it makes them feel like there is no middle ground. You are either with us or against us. There are often many sides to an argument, and it is not just yes or no. He also begins by stating some murderers deserve the death penalty. But he never really states which murderers, nor the criteria which we should decide who deserves the death penalty.
Gulf is unbridgeable between those of us who believe that some murderers, and I emphasize some murderers, should be put to death, and those who believe that no murderer should ever be put to death. Take this example. On the afternoon of July 20th,
the example that he gives us is one of a very heinous crime, one that I quite honestly had a hard time stomaching. I'm not going to play the whole thing right here, right now. You can watch it at the link below. But the thing that we need to remember here is that this entire argument is purely an appeal to emotions. It's the pro-lifers waving a picture of a dead and mutilated fetus in your face as you walk into the abortion clinic. He wants you to sympathize with the man and say something like, those two other men deserve to die. But we need to think calmly and rationally. Why these two people? What about this case made Prager choose it over any other murder case? We also have to ask, if not the death penalty, then what is the proper punishment for?
Not. Those opposed to capital punishment believe that these two men have a right to keep their lives. So, is there anything a person can do to deserve the death penalty? To those opposed to capital punishment, the answer is no. In fact, many opponents of capital punishment believe that killing murderers is the same as murder.
This next point is that some people oppose the death penalty because they believe that murder is wrong. Then how does killing some people make the situation correct? Not that murder is murder, but how can we, in one hand, say murder is wrong, but that we really should kill these very specific people because we ultimately do not like what they did? Notice how Prager just not even attempts to reconcile this. He just is like, what? How could anybody believe that putting someone to death as punishment is the same as murder in the first place? Just how? He instead should have addressed why this is not murder and how we can equate murder and not murder, or how we can determine what is murder and what is not murder. Some people might argue that since the state is putting the person to death, and not a person specifically, that it is not murder. But you have to remember that people are required to carry out the state killings, and thus it is people who are doing the killing ultimately. Simply shrugging it off does nothing to address the other side's argument. What makes killing someone murder and not simply killing someone? Why should the state have this some kind of power.
Of an innocent family with putting the murderers of that family to death. Opponents of capital punishment also argue that keeping all murderers alive sanctifies the value of human life. But the opposite is true. Keeping every murderer alive cheapens human life because it belittles murder. That's easily proved.
This argument I kind of understand. What opponents are saying is that life is so precious that not even the state can take it away. We can take away your rights, we can take away your livelihood, but we cannot take away your life. It also lets the murderer see that even after all the pain that they have caused, they are still seen as a person worthy of life. Something that the murderer could not give their victims. I would also like to point out that the death penalty may entice people to simply commit murder-suicides more, saying things like, I'm going to die anyway. So keeping people alive lets you know that there are certain punishments that we deem worse than death.
Imagine that the punishment for murder were the same as the punishment for driving over the speed limit. Wouldn't that belittle murder and thereby cheapen human life? Of course it would. Society teaches how bad an action is by the punishment it meets.
Yeah, so the guy whose wife and kids were murdered wants some murderers to be put to death. Should we give every murderer some kind of psychoanalysis so that we can determine which ones should be put to death in a consistent way? Should Elizabeth Whitlofer be put to death, a nurse in Woodstock, Ontario, who killed several people in her nursing homes over her career by administering a lethal dosage of insulin? Hey, her victims didn't suffer. They just quietly passed on.
Is the doctor wrong? Is he immoral? Well, if you think capital punishment is immoral, then Dr. Pettit is immoral.
Prager demonstrates this same strange black and white thinking by asking us if we think Mr. Petit is wrong for wanting the murderer to die, and he is immoral for thinking this. Given what he has been through, it is perfectly reasonable feeling, but it is society's duty to act upon this feeling and thus validate it. It is not simply about this person being moral or immoral for thinking this way. Not to mention, how do you reconcile the cognitive deficiency of saying some murderers should be put to death with is this person either moral or immoral? What makes him more moral than perhaps the family members of Elizabeth Whitlofer's victims?
This argument that an innocent person may be executed. This argument.
It is a common thread among people who are anti-death penalty to say that an innocent person may be executed. I always found this argument kind of strange. Yet this is a real concern, but it kind of sidesteps the question of should we use death as a punishment for certain crimes? Does this murderer deserve to die? The better question may be, what can we do to prevent innocent people from accidentally being killed via the death penalty? Perhaps hire proponents of evidence. So in this point, I completely agree with Dennis Prager. If you are against the death penalty on all cases, don't even bring this up.
Other prisoners, guards, and people outside of prison in case of escape or early release than the infinitesimally small number of people who might be wrongly executed. And now with
Yes, it is true that violent people are likely to be violent to other prisoners and guards in prison, and they are likely to reoffend if they get out. Rather than simply putting these people to death, maybe we should ask, what steps can society take to ensure the safety of other people? And can we create a better prison system for these specific people? Yes, killing these people may save more lives in the future, But does that justify the killing of this person?
Religion that only God has the right to take human life. I always wonder what religion these people are referring to, since the holiest book of no religion of which I am aware ever made that plain.
It seems rather odd that a Christian doesn't understand where the concept that only God can take life came from. Perhaps people are simply citing the thou shalt not kill statement. I mean, that one's pretty clear. Although the Bible, for example, is full of people killing other people in the name of God and not in the name of God. So I don't think that religion is a useful metric in this case. Although again, here Prager is with the same hypocrisy. God gives us morality, yet the Bible says absolutely nothing on either side for the death penalty.
Proverbial fence on this issue, please ask yourself this question. Do you really believe that the torturers, rapists, murderers of Dr. William Pettit's wife and daughters, and evil men like them, deserve to keep their lives?
Perhaps I do not believe that these two specific people deserve to keep their lives. But I may also think that rapists deserve to be raped, or that someone who hacks up a hypothetical person's limbs, then they should rot in prison with their limbs cut off. An eye for an eye makes the world blind. It's vindictive and vengeful.
If you're like most people, your answer is no.
Who are these people? What percentage of people, at least in North America, are in favor of the death penalty? And the question still remains, should society be acting on the emotions of often desperate people? I am not trying to sway people towards or against the death penalty. I want people to think critically about it and learn to recognize the difference between a person's gut reaction and the standards that a rational society